From the keyboard to the boardroom, this is the Business of Esports podcast.
The fastest growing entertainment phenomenon of this generation.
I, Prophet of Esports, joined today by my friend and co-host William Collis.
Yeah, we got the book of Esports out. It's a big deal.
So everyone knows me as the Prophet and William as the Professor.
You may call me the Prophet, but in my life outside of the business of esports, I have worked on the investment side of the table for the better part of the last 2 decades. The single fastest growing area of gaming and esports is gambling. It's booming right now. You don't need to be a prophet like me to see that. However, as an investor, I've stayed away from gambling and betting companies because of the reputational risk and often shady nature of the companies involved. This was true until now. I've recently bought stock in a new public company called Esports Entertainment Group, or EEG, which is focused on esports and gambling. The big difference that changed my mind is that EEG is a public company, NASDAQ listed, and fully regulated, focused on esports betting. The regulatory and audit requirements of a public company are key in my mind to provide the needed transparency for players, bettors, and investors. I had an opportunity to host the CEO of EEG on this podcast a couple of months ago, and I was very impressed by his vision for the company. We've stayed in touch, and I'm delighted to announce that they've accepted to become a sponsor of the podcast. If you're a family office, institutional investor, or investor of any kind, really, Esports Entertainment Group, ticker symbol GAMBLE, GMBL, might be one of the best ways to get exposure to the esports betting space and gaming in general. Make sure to check them out at esportsentertainmentgroup.com. Having said that, I need to make sure to state that this is only my opinion. I'm not an investment advisor or selling stock in the company. Please make sure you do your own research and seek advice from a licensed professional if you're looking to invest in the field. From the keyboard to the boardroom, this is the Business of Esports podcast. I am Paul Dawalibi. I'm joined today by my friend and co-host, William Collis. For those of you who are new to the podcast, welcome to the official podcast of esports. What we do here is we cover the most pressing gaming and esports topics and news of the week, but we look at all of it through a business and C-suite lens. We dissect, we analyze the business implications of everything happening in this industry. For our regular listeners, for those of you who tune in every week, thank you so much for being a fan. Thank you so much for all the 5-star ratings and reviews. Thank you for all the love you give us. It's what keeps this going. If you're new to the podcast and you're loving it, please leave a 5-star rating and review. It helps others to find the podcast. Tell your friends about it. Go buy William's book, The Book of Esports, on Amazon. All of these things we appreciate tremendously.
And then review it. We're in a rush to get to 100 5-star reviews. We're at 83. We need 17 more, guys. Come on, you gotta get it. It's like,
why is there some prize at 100, William?
No, it's just very few books get more than like 30 or 40 reviews unless they do well. Like if you go to most books, like they have. So 100 is a personal goal that I have, because then I can say to my wife, I have 100 5-star reviews. I don't know what I can say. I just want to get it. But wait,
how was your week?
Paul, my week was, again, incredible. But
okay,
can I just lead off with the biggest news story of possibly the year in esports?
Okay. I thought last week was your biggest news story ever.
What?
I thought last week was the biggest ever.
No, this is, I mean, we've had a lot of biggest weeks, but this week may be the biggest of all.
Which is?
This week, Heroes of the Storm got a new hero for the first time in I can't even count. They literally just released a new hero.
There are people at Blizzard still working on this game?
Apparently. They were like,
are you sure this is official? Not some rogue employees that you've been paying behind.
It is official. They started listening to the podcast. They're like, that kid William really likes Heroes of the Storm. We got to give him a new hero. And bam, They're like literally like out of nowhere. You had no idea. And then they're like, new hero. His name's Hogger. He's a knoll. He spins around. It's awesome. So if you ask me how my week was, I think I just told you.
Like World of Warcraft Hogger.
World of Warcraft Hogger. So everyone's making jokes about like his voice lines are like, let me tell you how I escaped Stormwind Keep. Like,
You know how like Hogger is one of, I would say, if not the, well, hold on, I don't want to go too far. It's, I would argue, top 3 WoW memes ever.
okay. So Leroy Jenkins is number 1, right?
Yep. Yep.
Leroy Jenkins is number 1.
Yep.
Number 2 is Next Ramus Blood. Like the
No,
blood
I would put Hogger number 2
You would
because
put
Hogger is the
number
first.
2?
It's the first real like elite that you kill.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh, Paul, I know that. Yes.
Okay. And so it's like, like the looking for group Hogger is like you want a meme at like level 60 in classic WoW. That's what you put out there, right?
Wow.
I don't know.
Okay,
Or you
wow.
want, or do you want to, you want to grief other players? You go and just camp Hogger because they're all trying to kill him to finish whatever quest they've got, and you just stand around
Well,
waiting for him to spawn and one shot him.
It's that Hogger. Yes, it's that Hogger.
Interesting.
So,
And is he any good?
nobody really knows. Like, I mean, these new heroes, like, they always seem overpowered at launch. I played him. I actually thought he was underpowered, but I think that has more to do with me being absolutely useless at the game despite playing it nonstop for 6 years. So,
Okay.
I felt like I just died all the time when I played him, but it doesn't matter. Like at this point, they could put a mouse trap, and a piece of cheese in the game, and I would buy it. Like I'd be like, this is incredible. Like
So you actually have spent money on the game now?
oh my God, yes.
No,
Oh
meaning
my
like
God.
recently, like this
Yeah,
new
yeah.
content.
I bought the hero. They released new content. They bought the hero. Paul, economic incentives. Like, if I want them to keep releasing new heroes, I have to buy them. So
I still don't believe that this is some official project at Blizzard. I really believe it's like 2 rogue employees that Oxygen is paying behind, sort of
behind the scenes,
like under the table, to get them.
Maybe we should be quiet about it. Maybe they've just survived because like nobody's noticed. They're in like a closet somewhere, and they're like, they're like,
they've somehow escaped official HR shutdowns, and
it's like Randy from what was it, Office Space or whatever. Like the guy's just there, like they're just like
in
"No one
limbo."
knows.
Yeah, that's it.
Keep developing. Like, no, but we kidded it. It has a very big user base, that game. Like it's not league level, but like it's clearly large enough for them to continue to resource it to some extent. And look, if they're shutting down StarCraft, but they're continuing to do HOTS, as much as we meme about like, oh, HOTS, William, you're so weird to like that game. Like it has an audience. It's just not a huge audience, but it's big enough that even a company like Blizzard still invests something in it. So
I mean, I would assume on its own, like I don't know how Blizzard internally looks at projects, right? But are they sophisticated enough? I mean, I'm sure they are, but the question is, do they break out sort of a P&L for each game, right? Is it simple enough to do that, or is there so much intermingling of resources at the company
oh my
that
God,
it becomes impossible?
I cannot believe they do not have a P&L specifically for that game, at least on the revenue side. The cost side might be a little harder to attribute because you borrowed an artist here, you reused an asset there. But like I have no doubt that the games are run as pretty strict individual P&Ls with relatively high control.
Which means that it must be profitable, right? To keep going.
Yeah, the big question that kills things like this in big organizations is SKU rationalization, right? This is why like Coke and what is it, Clorox, or all the household products continuously cycle out brands despite the fact that they're actually quite successful. Like if you and I started one of those brands, we'd be like, this is a hit. But SKU rationalization is a big driver of overall profitability in big businesses, and that's sort of what happened to StarCraft, right? It got SKU rationalized essentially. I bet you for the investment on it, it was still profitable. The question is, could you put those dollars somewhere else and have a higher return? Could you put that management intention somewhere? And so I think it's interesting that Heroes of the Storm, like clearly they're not scared to, cut it if they need to. They killed the esports scene, right? It was dead until the CCL. But it is interesting that like they don't skew. So again, I think it speaks to the game is a lot bigger than I think people realize. But I mean, I just like to kid about it because it's a funny meme now. It's like our top memes are dumpster fire, heroes of the storm, what is Lindsay's nickname? That's like our three like business of esports memes. So
I don't know. I would put some others up there, but
okay, sure.
Stadia's dead. That the game stuff. GameStop's dead. Like there's a hot garbage pile, which we could put a few things on.
Yeah, we should come up with a meme list for us. Anyway, meme tier list, business of esports.
But hold on, I want to. There's a sort of an interesting business discussion here, right? Because the conclusion you've sort of come to is if they haven't killed it, it means they can't find a better place to put those dollars.
Or it means whatever internal hurdles they have, the game is still clearing, right? So they probably have a profitability metric and they probably have a minimum revenues metric, and it's continuing to perform there.
Yeah, I sort of refuse to believe that it was outperforming StarCraft based on those metrics. And so is there another possible conclusion that maybe they just don't want to give up on the genre, right? They're okay giving up on RTS, but they're not okay giving up on MOBAs because at some point they have bigger plans for the genre. Like, could that have factored in other than just sort of pure P&L?
Look, I mean, I think if that's the case, it's not good strategic direction, because if your belief in the business is we just need to have something in the genre, like we just need it, it's a portfolio management, I would say, why will you do a MOBA but not an RTS? Like, why isn't it worth it?
Because they see the RTS genre in decline the same way, battle royales on the uptick, right? Like, you could argue that there are certain genres that are in favor or in fashion versus out of fashion. And I would argue RTS is definitely one of those that are out of fashion.
Well, like the belief everybody in the Heroes of the Storm community has, myself included, is that it's going to come back, because it was actually the genre is very large. It makes sense from a portfolio managed perspective for Blizzard to play to have there. And as much as the game gets memed, it actually has a fairly active and engaged player base, right? And so, I think like people, in the community, I'm not saying this is right, but in the community, I think the view is it was a casualty of overinvestment in the Overwatch League, right? The actual competitive scene. But Blizzard could revisit that decision, particularly when your comps in the marketplace are Dota and League, which are basically the two biggest things out there, right?
So you agree with my theory here, that it's keeping sort of a poker in the fire because they believe in the genre?
I could. It's a platform, whether it's Heroes 2.0, which they already did actually, or Heroes 3.0, or whatever it is, or I could believe that. But I would tend to believe more that it's a lot simpler. I think the business is run to P&L and, like I said, minimum revenue metrics. And I think StarCraft, because here's my question for StarCraft. Like, I'm sure it had an engaged player base and all those things, but what were people buying in that game?
That's true.
That's true. The criticism I have of StarCraft, I'm sorry, is it might have had a ton of active players. I know it's very popular, but what was getting monetized there? Like, I don't know anybody who spent anything on StarCraft for years, because the RTS genre, like, sure, you can buy new skins for your Zergs, like sometimes, but a lot of the pro players don't even like that because it's anti-competitive. It alters a silhouette, or it causes an issue. So at least with Heroes of the Storm, they can drop a new hero every 6 months and get a $20 check from, 100% of their player base, right? So,
I mean, that's a whole interesting other discussion we should probably have sometime, William, which is the genre itself, if it's difficult to monetize, is sort of doomed to fail, right?
I think I think this is a much bigger discussion, and I would love to have it because it is a fascinating one. But I definitely think some genres are better equipped for monetization than others. And I think RTS, if you look at how RTSs have been monetized, even a modern RTS like StarCraft 2, it was stuck in the box copy era, where the model was base game, sell expansions.
Yeah, well, right? That's when it got popular. So the question is, but without sort of diving deep into this, let's tease it for the future, okay? Yeah. For a future discussion. But what genre would you put at the top of the sort of best for monetization pile?
Heartbeat, no questions asked, MOBAs. Or rather, anything that has the MOBA mechanic of purchasing new characters. because fundamentally, I think players are the highest willingness to spend for gameplay enhancements. And to date, MOBAs and to some extent now shooters like R6 does this and Valorant does this, right? They have your operators or your right, like and Apex has this a little too. Like it's the same thing, and I think that's the single most important thing is genres that have adapted to sell game augmentations to players, right?
So you'd put MOBA at the top of the list.
Yeah, what would you put above that?
Well, before I get to that, what would you put at the very bottom of the list? Would RTS be right at the bottom?
I would put I'd put chess. Like I'd put static games that have no evolution. I'm serious. Like I'd put chess, like static
That's
games,
true.
like they have no
like or a
value.
TF, like a team fight tactics or stuff like that. Like
Yeah. Actually, as I think about my thing, maybe I'd actually put CCGs as number one because it's a challenge to use, but I suspect the monetization per user is even higher in CCGs because it's the same structure. So
I had not thought of that. That's an interesting one. I mean, the one I
Yeah.
was going to float as top was MMO, just because you have the subscription revenue on top of all the cosmetics, on top of all the sort of in-game gold, on top of all those things. You have sort of multiple revenue streams.
MMO's good too, but I think the general thesis, the problem with the MMO business model, right, is subscription doesn't access your whales, right? It has two problems. One is there's a whole audience of people who would play less than $10 a month, right? So you lose the tail, and your biggest whales pay $10 a month. So yeah, I know that there are caveats, but I fundamentally think most games today are whale leveraged. And a great example of this, Paul, is Genshin Impact, right?
It's true.
Like go tomorrow. Could Genshin Impact have been a subscription game? 1,000%. That game goes subscription really easily, right?
Yep.
It didn't. It went well, and it's better for it because we talked on the last podcast? We talked about it broke all the monetization records for the month.
A few podcasts ago, I think.
2 podcasts ago. So
yeah,
I think your point is right. I mean, the best is if you combine all the revenue levers, right? like that's like my fantasy is the game that charges you when you turn on your monitor. But obviously there's a consumer willingness to pay gap. But I'm still a fan of like oi tariffs and like pricing like that says like you should go to Disney World and they should charge you the minimum marginal utility of every ride you ride on. Like it makes a lot of economic sense, but it doesn't work in the real world. Like, but I'm still like, yeah,
it could. Tech could get us there, right?
If
you track the player enough and you watch the player enough, you could get to that point, right?
Well, there's
where he's got $3 left in his pocket, so that very last ride before he leaves all of a sudden goes from $7 to $2.95.
Well, that's
right?
That's the exact question. But then how do you feel about dynamic pricing like that? Like we have this belief that it should be one price offered to everybody, right? But like, should it? You know what I mean? Like we're comfortable that if you buy on Black Friday, you pay 20% less than me who bought the week earlier. So it is a very dangerous slope to go down. I will say dynamic pricing can sound evil. It can sound scary, and it's almost like it's so difficult to implement well. It is almost never worth trying to implement. But there's one type of dynamic pricing that works, and it's sales. And that's it. That is the only dynamic pricing you can get. And
yeah, but you're not extracting every possible dollar.
No, you're not. You're not living my fantasy of oi monetization for like.
Anyway, let's move on to some news.
We're actually a business of esports podcast, not a business of HOTS podcast. So
look at these are legitimate discussions around the business of the industry, right?
This is a great discussion. I think this is like
we need to dedicate time to, I think, more in depth on that one.
We have to go back. We got to do like a themes podcast where we revisit it. All right, but we have some great news stories.
Well, that's actually a good tease before I jump into news stories, because we are going to have some end of year specials as we've always done. So stay tuned for those. And actually a kind of a cool announcement. I don't want to promise it next week, but I will say in the coming couple of weeks, we've got some very cool stuff in the works that we will be ready to announce very, very soon.
ton of good stuff, guys. Ton of good stuff. The business of esports is really growing. I don't know if you've seen, just listening to the podcast, like just, or if you check out the live stream, all the new assets on our live stream are just, I mean, like I still groove to that 5-minute intro we play now. So shameless plug to check out our live stream Wednesdays, 8:30 p.m. LinkedIn, Twitter, YouTube. Find
Facebook.
us. It's Facebook. Yeah. It's really fun, guys. I'm not kidding. And we're real people. You can actually talk to us. We reply. We're just as crazy on the live stream. So, check it out.
Let's jump into some news, William. We've got this first news story, and it's an interesting one because this is, this guy is the face of gaming and esports, really. And the story here is from essentiallysports.com. And it's Ninja sort of on the cover here with the headline, "Just make an esports Olympics. Ninja wishes for gaming to be bigger than ever." This was sort of a quote that they took from his interview with GQ Australia. And Ninja sort of expressed his views about ambitions for gaming to be part of the Olympics. And I'll just read the quote from Ninja himself here. It says, Ninja said, "Sure, but how about just make an esports Olympics? How about that? Make an E-lympics. We don't need gaming to be a bona fide sport. That whole conversation is, in my opinion, very overhyped. There are already so many diehard Olympianites who are like, we don't want them tainting it. It's like, all right, fine. We don't want to be in there. We'll just create our own." What do you think of that? First of all, I mean, what do you think of his quote? Obviously, William. But there's a bigger conversation here around, and I think there's almost some weird nostalgia here. I believe we had this kind of discussion on our very, very first episode of the podcast, which is like, are esports sports, right? Should they be considered sports? So it goes back to that discussion a bit. But what do you think of his quote specifically here?
Well, it's really interesting because when I first read this article, I was like, right on, brother. Like, I literally was like, we need it. It should exist. I think you're right. If the Olympics doesn't want to do it, carve it out separately. Like, and I still feel that way. I think the sentiment is really, really good, right? It's the right sentiment. However, I have to say two things here. The first thing I would say is, okay, easier said
I think I know
than
where
done,
you're going with this.
right?
Okay.
Well, the first thing I say easier than that, because the practical reality of this is these aren't just sports. They're owned by the publishers. So how do you even begin to set this up? Like, what's your conversation with Riot? Like, you call them up and you're like, "Hi, I'd like to throw the Olympics of League of Legends." And you know what Riot says? "We already have the Olympics of League of Legends. It's called the League of Legends Championships. Goodbye." Oh, wait, hold on. Do you have tons and tons of money? No. Okay. So it doesn't, like, it can't happen. Like, there are so many practical barriers pragmatically for something like this to exist, because in sports, the athletes are the unit that you need, and they would like to compete in more competitions. Here, the publishers, the unit you need, and they have very few incentives to sign on. The only way they might do it is with legitimacy. If a body with true international legitimacy, like the IOC, comes in and says they want to do it. And now least to my third thing, which is, okay, Ninja, you do it. Like if you're serious about it, you're one of the few people in the space with heft and actually, candidly, intelligence and good enough management that I believe you might be able to pull it off, right? Like, everything we've seen about you is your career has been expertly positioned. You have a lot of credibility and mainstream crossover appeal. Like, if you think it should exist, there are very few stakeholders in the space that could put it together. You might actually be one of the people who could start to look at that. I don't think you could do it by yourself, but I think you probably have access to a network that could start to activate it. So that's my response.
Ninja's E-lympics. You see it as this kind of branding, and he would be driving this, really. And you think that would cause the publishers to get in line and say, because keep in mind, right, if it's a true Olympics sort of counterpart, right, they would be competing in multiple esports, right? There'd be an event for
no. Where'd you get that from? The people who swim don't also run. You just have
I'm not saying the same competitors,
yeah.
But if you're putting on an E-lympics, there's going to be a League of Legends event. There's going to be a Smash Brothers event. There's going to be a Counter-Strike event, a Dota event, right? Like, you need multiple events with different competitors for it to be an Olympic kind of counterpart. But
That's
what
right.
you're saying is the developers won't sign on
Well,
unless you
like,
bring bagfuls of money,
why
or
would yeah, well, why would you, if you're Riot, why would you create an event that you do not have control over, right?
yeah,
That is an air right now, you're Riot, you are the kingmaker. You get to say who the best League of Legends team in the world is every year. And you
yep.
get to get all those eyeballs and all of that monetization. Why would you create another event that also gets to crown a legitimate winner unless either you get so much more money it's worth it for you? There's very
But
few incentives for publishers to do this.
the same thing happens in traditional sports and traditional Olympics, right? There's hockey and basketball at the Olympics, but they also have their own championships.
Yeah, yeah.
So
So I'm not.
it's those two things can coexist. The question is, can you convince the developers in this case?
Yeah, I'm
And I
not
think
saying
there
it's
is
not.
probably a business case which says, I'm Ninja. I'm going to throw an E-lympics with my brand name on it, right? We're going to get millions of viewers, and we're going to do some rev share with you, the developers.
That is exactly right. But that's what I mean is this is a very difficult proposition to get together because it starts with I can credibly throw an event that's going to get 100 million viewers, and there are very few people in the space that can say that, right? There are very few people, right? Even publishers sometimes, many publishers can't credibly say hello Overwatch League
Activision
finals.
Blizzard.
Yes, like many publishers can't. So like, but the point I'm making is, yeah, of course the Olympics works. Why the Olympics works is they have a large built-in audience, so they get to make an economic case for the participation of other sports, and athletes can get releases to play, and also candidly, the athletes ask for it, right? There's a stature and weight to the Olympics. It's like, why do you know, like that draws people in because it's an Olympic gold medal, and it's a little bit independent of like the economics too. It has a historical weight. People want to win that. Like people like pro basketball players want Team USA to take home the gold, you know? So it's not necessarily purely economic at that stage. But yeah, like I think it could exist, it should exist, but like, by the way, like people are trying to do this. Like, I don't know if you saw, Intel did the Esports Olympics before, when these Olympics were supposed to be scheduled in Tokyo, right? And they made a big deal out of it. There was an Esports Olympics website you could go to, and guess who they could get to sign on to do the Esports Olympics because the publisher power? Capcom and Street Fighter. Like, that's like who you could, because the reality is, yeah, smaller esports with you can get some decent ones, but for this to be an Olympics, you actually have to have credibility. For this to have an Olympics, you would have to have League, Dota, CS:GO, R6, Fortnite, you know, whatever. You'd have to have 5 big ones. You can't have like Blaze Blue. As much as I like watching Blaze Blue, no one's gonna say it was the Esports Olympics because Blaze Blue and Marvel vs. Capcom 3 Ultimate Edition were played, you know? So just to reach deep there, or Guilty Gear Xrd or something like.
So do you see, like, which scenario, William, in your mind is more likely then? Some kind of partnership with the IOC, and eventually we get to the Olympics accepting esports as part of their show? Or the E-lympics, which is its own separate thing, which requires lots of money or some star power to drive? Like, which one is the most likely scenario in your mind?
It'll be the Olympics, because the Olympics already struggles with admitting things already, right? Like there's a whole, I think, culture there of like, oh, not quite yet. It's not a proper sport, you know, and like going to like, even though honestly, if we have shooting, how is esports different from shooting? Like it's a manual dexterity game at that point. Like I think it's a very hard argument if you think shooting is a sport, which I do, by the way. I'm not saying shooting is not a sport.
Well, I'm an excellent, like, very world-class skeet shooter, so I would argue it is a sport.
Are you serious?
Yes.
How come we've never talked about this?
Why would we talk about my skeet shooting?
Because I like, we should go skeet shooting. That would be fun. I've been skeet shooting twice in my life. It was amazing both times. Like, okay, well, this is a totally separate discussion. But, yeah,
but no,
okay,
I see what you're saying. You think it's just too stuffy as from a culture standpoint. And look, I would argue the Olympics from an entertainment value standpoint have been on the decline, right? This is not a brand sort of on the rise.
and particularly now with the Olympics being rescheduled and everything, like I think like they were already a huge economic cost for the host country for arguable economic returns. I'm sure many people will email me after this and say, "What are you talking about? The Olympics is a massive stimulus for blah blah." I'm very skeptical that the Olympics has significant long-term beneficial impacts. You do it for soft power and international pride, but like, yeah, I think now the costs of that are much harder to bear when you realize you might have to, like, you could lose a whole year of your life to it, which is sort of what's happened with Tokyo right now.
I just think why do we continue to try and adopt the trappings of traditional sport? Like it boggles my mind every time I hear a story like this.
Well,
Who cares about the Olympics, right? If we're esports, we're digital, we're global, we're all these things. You don't need to walk into a town, spend $1 billion on facilities, and and be planning this 12 years out, and like none of that's
the frustration
necessary.
is not that we need it. I think, Paul, the frustration is it would be nice to have, right? For two reasons. I think the frustration is like, look, this would go a lot faster if you would participate, right? Like the rise of esports is inevitable. It's going to happen. If the Olympic Committee came in and made 8 top games an Olympic esport event, it would happen faster. Like, I'm just not going to lie. Like, we get further
my point
ahead
is,
a little quicker, right?
If I was the hypothetical president of esports, okay, and the IOC came to me and said, we want to do esports at the Olympics, right?
Yep.
My view, I would say no. I would say no. I don't need you, IOC. I don't need you, Olympics. You're an old brand. You're physical in nature, right? Tons of costs. Like, I don't need you. I can go create something far better, far more cost effective, far more entertaining. Like,
I don't know, Paul. That's pretty iconoclastic. I go back to the Olympics stretches back to, like there's history and weight and I think it's the opposite. I think it would be nice, but I think where you're coming from is you're never going to embrace it. Olympics is always going to be Sunday, 3 a.m. You're basically saying you're never gonna you're not capable, IOC, of evolving into the type of event that esports needs to be its home. Right.
Esports, for example, can do an Olympics every year, right?
Yeah.
The cost to produce a digital virtual event way less than putting on an Olympics. So right off the bat, we can be better, right? And second of all, why use existing games? Why use League, or like why not do the esport equivalent of track and field?
What is that, Paul? Like, what is the esports equivalent of track and field?
Like think of like an AIM Lab or what's the other big one there? Kovacs.
Yeah.
Right? Let's test the underlying sort of skill sets and separate the best from the rest.
I don't think that works because it fundamentally the Olympics is a viewership product, and we don't want to watch like what you're suggesting is like, let's watch a bunch of athletes train. We don't want to watch people use training tools. We want to see people play the real thing, right? Like, but I take your sentiment, which is like, if you were truly going to design a global championship, would you think differently about how that global championship behaves? And I think your better point is, would you have it every year? And I think that's really interesting. Like, I think you might maybe every year is too often because of commitments and everything, but like, maybe you'd have it every 2 years. Like 4 years is an arbitrary number. It's not like 4 years is set in stone as the perfect amount of time between. It's 4 years, right? For winter, summer to summer. I got to make sure. I'm really, shows how much I care about the Olympics that I like don't know the time gap between it. But but like and I'll really, it also has the perfect mascot in Sonic. Like, I mean, dear Sonic, like if you're gonna come back for anything, come back for the esports Olympics. It's like your time, buddy. Like,
no, but just from a business standpoint too, it makes so much more sense to stick with a virtual digital product. You can put on more frequently. It could change year to year much more easily. right? Like you don't need to spend
but then
12 years evaluating a new sport or a new,
yeah, but
right?
then I would argue sort of one of the lessons I take away from how Activision Blizzard managed their esports is they had all their world championships at once at BlizzCon, right? Do you remember how they did that for a long time? I
Yep.
think they still sort of do. That I think was a really bad decision to make because that's like scheduling the NBA finals, the Super Bowl, and the FIFA World Cup on the same day, right? So like, why do the Olympics have all the events at once? Because it's really difficult to organize. You need everybody grouped at the same time, right? It's like a logistical problem. You don't have that with esports. I would say you should just have separate Olympics for the major events, at which point I'm back at the LCS, the R6 Invitational, we're back to the original structure that we're in today. So if you really think it through, the reality is the esport, like the formats like the Olympics are very good when it requires physical presence, true international mobilization, right? And, candidly, has a real policy and cultural weight value, which I think is a strong mismatch for esports today on all of those things. I don't think the United States would sit down at a negotiating table and say, and you should be really impressed by us because we just had the esports Olympics. It's not the same as Japan raising their soft power with Tokyo 2020. It's just not. But it could get there. But for all those reasons, I think it's not realistic we get something like that in the short term, unless it's either two things. There's such viewership potential that a grouping of people who already have a large built-in audience can catalyze it under their brands, which I think Ninja is the most likely to do it. Like, I think somebody like that could get publishers on board, could bring in other streamers, and could develop the built-in audience we need. Or it's something like the IOC saying, hey, the writing is on the wall. No one's going to care about the Olympics 60 years from now, 70 years from now. Which I don't know if it's true, but I think it's going to end up much more niche than it is. If you just, right, like, we need to get ahead of the curve. This is it, right? And I would like it to be the latter because I don't like seeing old organizations displaced. I'm a traditionalist at heart. Like, I would rather see those businesses catch up with the times. And again, like, I also go to the Olympics, like, what's the big deal?
I'm the opposite. I want to see them completely.
Yeah, you do.
Completely disrupted and destroyed.
You're like V for Vendetta here. You're like, you just want to watch the world burn. Like,
no, quintessential venture capitalist. It's all about disrupting the status quo.
And I'm like boring, like ivory tower academic. I'm like, oh, Oxford University should always be around. Like.
No, but like there's another point too with E-lympics here and this concept, which is you could get rid of many of the sort of the gatekeepers around traditional sports in the Olympics, right? Like if you want to go play on Team Canada at the Olympics for hockey, right?
Yep.
You can't just try out. Like you can't just show up and be good enough potentially and they put you on the team. No, there's a group at the Canadian Olympic Committee that decides who gets to try out or who even gets to be on the team, right? And who doesn't. And it's all very gated for the most part. Some of them are more open, like swimming or things like that. But the reality is a lot of it's very gated. I could see an Olympics where, think of it as an open on steroids.
Yep.
Right? Where literally anyone with a league account can potentially represent their country, or anyone with a CS:GO account or right? Like where it plays to the strengths of esports, which is total accessibility and democratization that you don't get in traditional sports.
Yeah, you could. It would be really interesting that like Riot could just announce like an open play and like, hey guys, league, like, yeah.
But that's the difference from LCS, right? It would be, think of it, a tournament on a global scale with millions and millions of potential participants.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I just think, the reality is I think the publishers are just fine managing their own leagues today. And even there, they've had some trouble sorting it out, right? And I think the incentive is there are probably more incentives on the publisher for control in the ecosystem than out licensing. And so, but we'll see what happens. I mean, I would love it. Like, dude, I would love it if it could exist. Like, I would watch it. And it would, the thing for me that bugs me most about Skulls on this is I have stopped watching the Olympics. Like, I just don't care. The only things I watch in the Olympics are curling at this point. Like, I'll watch like I don't know why I
Curling
like
is awesome.
curling.
No, I love it.
Curling is so fun to watch. I'm zero sarcasm. It's really fun to
Look,
watch.
you're preaching to the choir here. I love watching curling.
I don't know why I like watching curling, but it's fun. Like, so there's
Have you ever gone curling?
No, I've never gone curling.
It is phenomenally difficult. They make it look so easy, but it's really, really hard.
Oh my god,
really
We're
hard.
gonna have to do skeet shooting, curling. We should do like alternative sports fest. But like, if the Olympics had a Hearthstone gold medalist, like I would watch the Olympics again. Which is, I think, what I want to close on here is it makes me sad because I've tuned out to stuff like this. I just hear it, and when I hear like I'm like old man shouts at cloud. I literally, that's how I feel about. And I'm sorry if it seems mean, but I'm just like, it has a lot of value and a lot of weight to different generations, right? Like, things are changing, and don't for a second believe that just the power of crowning a world champion is exclusively owned by the Olympics, because I can point to dozens of examples in other sports already where it is not. Esports is on the route where the Olympics won't matter. Oh, sorry. Esports is on the route to be more popular, or at least as popular as sports, right? So I just see the IOC, like, the relevance just trends down over time, and I wish it didn't have to, and I wish they could get on board, but it's a pretty clear writing is on the wall scenario for me, and
there's tremendous irony in this, William, right? That the Olympics don't want esports, but in many, many ways, the Olympics benefit more from having esports than esports benefits from being at the Olympics, right? This is the great irony.
That's the thing I don't get about how these things are managed, right? Like, if I had a product, right? Like, I'm a product manager selling hairspray, right? And I have a huge problem that is, all of a sudden people under 35 aren't buying my hairspray anymore. And I'm like, uh-oh. I get that I sell most hairspray to 35 to 45-year-olds, but I can do math, and 10 years from now, I'll be in trouble because the under 35 demographic will be, I'm like, if I were that product manager and then an inventor came in and said, I have pink and blue hairspray. It's what all the under 35s want to wear. And yeah, you might think it's a weird color and nobody wants to dye their hair pink or blue, but like, trust me, I can show you that this is what under 35s. I would be like, well, that's great. This sounds like a product extension we need. You solved my problem. Come on in, right? Like, I don't get why the Olympics doesn't look at the problem that way, particularly because what's the cost of getting it wrong? They take it out. No one will remember. There's not like this giant axe of shame having, like, sports come in and out of the Olympics all the time,
The reason they don't is they're sitting in their ivory tower believing that Oxford University will always be a thing.
If I'd been wanting to be really like snobby, I could have been Oxbridge. It's Oxbridge University.
Let's
Lancaster House. Here at Lancaster House. I don't know why I think that's funny.
This next topic, this one's from GameReactor.eu.
Yeah.
The headline here is report Korean esports broadcasting station OGN is to close. Subheadline, the first esports broadcasting station is set to close its doors indefinitely. So these are reports coming out of South Korea. It's the first major esports broadcast station in that country, OGN, supposedly shutting down and claiming that basically it's going to disappear. I don't know if it's off the air just yet as of the time of this taping, but all the reports is that it is going away. The article here does say that OGN made a massive mark on esports and paved the way for esports to become more mainstream media. William, are you surprised at this to see, given all the growth on the content side, given all the growth on the broadcasting side, the Vens of the world, are you surprised to see OGN shutting down here?
I'm kind of heartbroken, actually. Like, this is actually kind of sad because OGN, like, I didn't really know too much about OGN until I started researching the Book of Esports. shameless plug, by the Book of Esports. But yeah, I didn't actually know. And when I really looked into the history of it, like it was pretty important to the formation of modern broadcasting networks and esports. And it was pretty pivotal to the growth of esports in Korea, which, as we know, is sort of the bellwether for the modern esports trend, right? So yeah, I'm like very sad because it's, I like to think that businesses that are in early and have heritage in a space like this should do well. And these guys, like, they're in a hot market. They were a first mover. They're in the right space. Like, you can't argue broadcasting is a bad space to be in esports today. I think the reality for this is, like, their business model, I think, got a little bit disrupted because on the low end, you had streamers that were producing a lot of competitive content, right? Um, and on the high end, you had the publisher leagues. And I think it's more a story of it's really tough to be an independent broadcaster, an independent league, or, you know, streaming or, content producer in esports today because you get so much pressure from bulk free content on the mainstream streaming platforms. And on the marquee stuff, which used to get farmed out to third parties, it's more and more publishers in-housing it. So, you know, I'm still surprised in Korea they couldn't get financing or partner up with someone or so. I suspect we're not getting the full story here. My gut is there's going to be some from the Ashes story for OGN. At a minimum, a Korean pro team should buy them, you know, just for the legacy heritage, right? Like, I just can't believe the assets wouldn't get scooped up in some way. But I do think it's probably a case of like, terrestrial broadcast TV, which is really what OGN was strong at in the beginning, is just not the best way to watch esports today. And being a great channel on Twitch isn't necessarily an awesome standalone business proposition because, like, for all the reasons I described, right? Like, you kind of are at the wrong point in the scale curve. So
Yeah, I think I have a bit of a hot take on this. I see a few reasons why this failed because to me, an esports broadcasting station, 24/7 esports content, you do that right in the US, there's almost no way to fail in my mind, right? And
Yeah.
I specify do it right.
Mhm.
I think the reason, if I had to guess, there's a few potential sort of reasons this failed. One, and I've said this before, and I think people gloss over it. I just don't think the Asian markets are as lucrative as people think. The average spend per user, essentially, per audience member, per viewer, whatever the metric is just always so much lower than the US. And so while the numbers from a total audience standpoint may be big, and Korea's, I'm sort of lumping Korea in with the rest of Asia, like China and
Yeah.
things like that. But
Yeah.
I just don't think those Asian markets are as lucrative as people think because they just look at the size and they don't look at sort of the disposable income of the fans themselves. Two, I think and we're seeing this in the US, cost structures getting out of whack with revenues, right? And Ven's the poster child for this. I'm not saying this is what OGN did, but I suspect in trying to build out sort of a proper broadcasting network to rival whatever else was on TV, they were probably overspending or spending far more than the business could sustain. And then the third thing I thought of was, as you mentioned, William, this is like one of the OG sort of players. These are one of the originals, probably run by gamers who started this as a passion project, as a hobby project. Time and time again, I've seen those people in the industry fail because while they are passionate gamers, they're just not great business people, right? Like the likelihood that they've built, two successful companies before this, probably low. I don't know the specific case with OGN. I'm talking sort of more generally that a lot of the people who've been in the industry a while don't have great track records in terms of company building. I suspect those are three potential sort of failure points here. I don't know if any of them are true, but
I agree with you on every point except for Korea is not a lucrative per capita market. Like, I totally disagree there. I think Korea and in general Asia is just a fine per capita spend market to be in. I mean, sure, there are some countries I'd probably that'd probably spend more, but particularly where OGN was born, I mean, like it's they should have done just fine. I would argue that the per capita spend is higher in Korea. It's a more mature market and the gamer culture is more ingrained there. There's more, kind of fan club-ish, like subscription, agglomeration. I mean, look at the BTS law that just got passed there, to just show that I am up on Korean pop group culture.
I mean, William, it's an interesting point that you make, but I think I read something, or I was watching something talking about why Korea produces so many gaming champions.
Yeah.
And one of the things I read was it's like they're out, right? That so many of these players come from abject poverty, and success in esports is their way sort of to rise above that, and the only way to rise above that in a society that is much more class driven than in the US.
Yeah, I don't want to speculate too much about that. I mean, I'm not an expert on Korean society or culture. I think in general we have a tendency to paint Asia with broad brushes that would just as easily apply to us. But like, I don't know. Regardless, I don't think it matters too much, because I think most of your points hold, right? Like it's like they're like they, and I think probably the biggest one is managed by gamers. The reality is, it is true that a lot of the first generation businesses, for every, one that was well run by somebody like Andy Din at TSM, right? There were like 36 dozen that were run by college kids who loved it, and the big successes do stand out. But I mean, I just literally, like, you want to see what bad management history looks like, go to Liquipedia sometime and look up teams from, 2012, right? Like, and I call it out specifically because you would sort of think like, oh, every team that was in early has survived. Oh no. Like, oh no. The history is littered with it. And like, there'll be brands, you'll be like, oh, I remember those guys. And you'll be like, oh, they're gone. Like, yeah, where were they for 6 years? And that's just an easy way of seeing, like, businesses managed by gamers, they don't tend to stick around long. And I could see that applying to OGN here for sure. All right.
I know you want to move on because you're excited about our last story.
I am. I'm so excited about it. I know I've been waiting for it the whole time. I'm like, all right, let's go.
But I'm going to make you wait like just a little bit longer, William, because I will say 2 words. The single fastest growing sector in esports is gambling. It's booming right now. You've probably heard me talk about it on past podcasts, live streams. As an investor, I've stayed away from the space because of all the reputational risk. That was really true until now. I ended up buying stock in a company called Esports Entertainment Group. We had the CEO on the podcast a couple of times. This is a public company, NASDAQ listed. They're focused really on esports betting. In fact, allowing players to play, to watch, and to bet. And they've got a very, very unique and comprehensive platform. I really like the business. And so if you're a family office, institutional investor of any kind, even if you just have a Robinhood account, I would definitely check out Esports Entertainment Group, ticker symbol GMBL, like gamble, because it might be one of the best ways for you to get exposure to the space as an investor. Having said that, here's the disclaimer. This is just my opinion. I'm not an investment advisor. I'm not selling stock in the company. Do your own research. Seek advice from a licensed professional if you're looking to invest in the field. All right, William, we're going to get to the story you've been waiting for here.
I can't wait. I can't wait.
And this is from Yahoo Finance. And the headline was, gaming platform Roblox acquires Imbellus. Imbellus, I assume is how it's pronounced. Imbellus assets ahead of IPO. So Roblox Corp said on Tuesday it had acquired the IP assets of cognitive assessment startup Imbellus to sharpen the U.S. online gaming platform's recruitment practices before a planned IPO. Imbellus, based in L.A., develops simulation-based tests that measure human thought processes. The company, which was valued at $57.5 million in a 2018 private fundraising round, has talked publicly about its application as a substitute for standardized U.S. tests such as the SAT college entrance exam. There's a quote here from the founder of Imbellus. She says, "We are creating a new team within Roblox, led by Imbellus's visionary founder, Rebecca Cantar, to build a system on Roblox for fair and objective assessments that will help us broaden our sources of potential talent from more diverse backgrounds. So, interesting piece of news, an acquisition right before their IPO. I will say, William, before we jump into this is unusual in the sense that it's pretty it's uncommon for companies to do any kind of major transactions after they filed their S1 prospectus, right? Because that's sort of like, here's the story, right? And you don't want to go changing the story in any material way before your actual IPO. Now, seems like probably a relatively small acquisition, so there's not much material in the change of Roblox's business. But announcing any acquisition is going to be out of the ordinary ahead of your IPO.
It's not normal course of business. Like,
so what do you make of this?
Well, there's what I think is a realistic explanation, and then there's the explanation I hope is true.
Yes.
And the explanation I hope is true, I want to stress this, I don't think it's true, but like I really hope it's true. So like I want to talk about it because it's interesting. So I think the practical thing is, like, anytime an acquisition is announced without the price being mentioned, I'm always a bit like, oh, that means somebody didn't want the price disclosed, right? I don't know.
This sounds like they bought Imbellus in a more of a distressed situation.
Yes.
Because they only bought the IP.
Yeah. Exactly. So I think that what I think might be happening here is Imbellus and disrupting the SAT is a brutally hard market to try to go after.
Yeah.
They did some great financing rounds. They probably have a really interesting product. They realized, hey, it turns out the SAT is more going for it than a test, right? And they had a good suite of investors who was able to find a good opportunity to offload this to someone. And Roblox is planning on hiring aggressively. And diversity is a problem in gaming and game development. And this is a nice solution for them to fold in at a relatively low cost, right? That, I think, is what is actually happening here. Now,
yeah, they beefed up their HR department.
Exactly. And I'm sure the founder, Rebecca Cantor, is charismatic and smart, and somebody that you would want on a team leading something like this, who's passionate about all the things she says she is. Like, the impression I get from Imbellus is a very genuine company, and she'd just be a great hire by herself and all of this stuff. So I buy that completely. Okay, now, I don't want to talk about that. I want to talk about what
let's get in. I want the conspiracy theories here, because I've got some too.
I hope is happening here. Yeah. What I hope is happening is that Roblox looked at their user base and were like, oh, snib snap. Like, everyone who plays this, which again, we kind of know isn't true from the perspective, but bear with me. And like, most of our users are like 13 to 18. That is prime schooling standardized test age. This is a company that does simulation-based assessments. Let's find a way of turning the hours you're playing in Roblox into an assessment, improving, tracking platform that is marketable and monetizable to universities, colleges, and other institutions. That would be so cool, right?
Hold on, I'll take it a step further.
Yeah.
They collect, so they put out, let me make it concrete. They put out a mini game within Roblox, right? Or a game on the platform that feels just and plays just like some game. But behind the scenes, it's an Imbellus assessment of some sort, right? And this data, they report it back to all the high schools and colleges. So without your knowledge even, you are being assessed, and that data is being given to colleges across, let's say, the US or whatever, so that they can make recruitment decisions without you ever having taken a standardized test at all.
I mean, even like, you can take this conspiracy theory as far as you want, right? Like, you could have it, but like, and I could take it to crazier places than that, right? Like, we could go tinfoil hat with this, but the idea is really
go tinfoil hat. I want to hear tinfoil hat.
Tinfoil hat on the live stream, guys. Shameless plug. If you want tinfoil hat content, live stream 8:30 on Wednesday. It's all tinfoil hat and no hair, I guess. I don't know, whatever you. But it's compelling, because if you have a product that is served to kids, right? One of the biggest spends on the kid market is education, like private schools, clubs, everything, right? Like, and I know this from being in toy marketing, is like, you really want to get access to the parental spend, because at the end of the day, kids don't have a lot of money, but mom and dad do, and mom and dad will spend a lot on things they think make their kids better. And I actually think it's cool, this idea that like nobody, and this is sort of the type of interesting thing that I think Roblox is capable of, right? As a business, is like, maybe this really is about, okay, how do we monetize this platform beyond creator? Could this be a set of assessment tools for schools? And I just think that like that's interesting. And I think it's a great idea. I mean, I'm very skeptical that it could work. I see a lot of problems with it. But that thinking is worth a try, particularly when you're getting IPO and get a ton of money. And it folds in another incremental market to what you're discussing, right? It folds in the whole EDU market. And think about how big that is, not just in the United States, but in Asia, right? Like, it's just like, it's such a great, like, it's what I like to say is the business kicker. You always want to say when you're pitching a company, this looks great, but wait, there's more. What if rare ore fell from the sky and we built a magic wand that cast lightning bolts? Then there'd be a whole nother business worth $1 billion, right?
I'll take it one step further, William. I'll say if they don't do this, they're missing an opportunity, right? Like the promise of Roblox that I believed was the promise of Fortnite that they missed out on. But now the promise of Roblox is they're going to build a platform that goes far beyond gaming, where gaming and the creation of virtual worlds is the medium, right? But what you deliver can be so much more. And if they manage to create that metaverse truly, right, with their audience of 13 to 18-year-olds, education and schooling is a big part of it. And I see a Roblox education product, which is not just assessment. It could be teaching. It could be delivering educational content all through a gaming universe, right? But this to me is a very, very obvious extension of their platform to the audience they are already serving.
Oh, but is it? I totally agree with you. But now I'm so skeptical of calling this, because I was so sure I knew where Fortnite was going. Like I like literally would have like double mortgaged my house to follow that Fort. Like, it was just, the writing was on the wall for me with that first concert in Fortnite. I was like, oh, here we go. It just hasn't gone there. It just hasn't gone. And so it makes me think, like, is there something inherent about these large software as a service, games as a service businesses that, and by the way, I think if we can see it, like, you're telling me nobody in the room at Roblox doing this acquisition was like, what if we used assessment tools? Like, they have the idea too, right? Like, and I believe me, I think the same thing is true for Fortnite. They had those ideas. There are ideas out there. Anyone can get them. Is there something about these gas models that makes them so hard to pivot once they're in market, that they just don't work if they're not designed to do it from the ground up? I don't know. It's an interesting question to me, but like, I really do wonder more and more if the reality of, it's so difficult to run a subscriptions games business today. We still haven't really figured out how to do it without burning out teams and burning down balance and all of those things, that like building another business alongside your SaaS business or your gas business just doesn't work. I don't know.
Roblox being a public company gives them a better shot than Fortnite. I'll put it that way. Easy access to public capital at all times, right? You need another $1 billion to go do this. Here you go, right? Like and I just think Fortnite, there was not a lack of vision, but I think distracted leadership that we didn't account for, right? That they had their eyes somewhere else for some reason, and they believed that was a more important fight. I think Tim Sweeney he's got so much money, he's become more of a crusader, right, than a CEO of a company with a grand vision. I think Roblox being held accountable by public shareholders, having access to public capital, like all those things bode well, I think, for Roblox delivering on that vision far more than a Fortnite ever could.
Yeah.
Then again, they could go the way of Activision Blizzard and be thinking only quarter to quarter, and it's all about optimizing, how do we get an extra 12 cents from every user and things like that, right? They may, as a consequence of being public, they may lose sight of the vision completely. That is a risk.
Yeah, it is. I don't know. I mean, it's like, we'll see what happens. But someone, like, there is some. It's interesting. We've had 3 games, I think, true platform level games that could have cracked this. Right? We had Minecraft. Right? Then we had Fortnite. Now we have Roblox. Right? Like, someone's gonna get that they're a true platform more than these existing publishers have. And again, I refuse to believe that the head of strategy or the VP of business partnerships at these businesses don't know that. I would be shocked if they didn't. It's going to be interesting to see who's going to be the first to get it. And unfortunately here, I just, the big thing that makes me think, I want to go take it back to actually grounded reality. The big thing that makes me think that Roblox isn't using this acquisition to do that is they would have said it. Like, they're going public. They're going to have to disclose a bunch of stuff anyway. If you're jamming it in after an S1, there better be a big reason to boy your price for it, right? Like, why not say at the last minute, but education matters too, right?
Because again, that's a material change to the business potentially. And so they may have hidden that for that reason, right? Like they may have just spun this as like, no, it's just so we can hire better. Don't worry, guys. Small acquisition, not material.
Yeah, it's like, guys, we're gonna, yeah.
If anything, they have the incentive to underplay it.
Yeah, and I did wonder too, like, do they not want people to know what they're up to? So like, oh, HR hiring, no one, like, boring, who's gonna staff up, like, but really, like, are you laughing at my? Like...
I think it's hilarious that if they're stodgy and backwards thinking, they have a British accent.
Well, I'm half British, so I guess I'm allowed to, like, have fun. It's my go-to character for, like,
I get it. I like it. It's the Ivory Tower guy.
It's the Ivory Tower guy. Oxbridge from Lancashire House. Like,
on that note, William.
Jane Eyre, are you coming in from the fields, Jane? Anyway, sorry. Okay, I'm gonna be quiet.
You can audition. You can audition for Downton Abbey another time on another podcast. For this episode, that wraps things up.
Would you care to come in? Okay, I'm gonna be quiet now.
I will remind everyone the podcast episodes drop every Thursday. Stay tuned for those. Obviously, if you're listening to it now, you probably know. But we do a live stream, an after podcast live stream that's a lot of fun. Williams mentioned it a couple of times this episode. Every Wednesday, 8:30 p.m. Eastern time. We talk about the stuff that didn't make it into the podcast. Usually there's a bigger cast. It's not just me and William. And the cast extends to you guys, the listeners and the viewers who participate in the live stream, who send us questions, who make comments. And we get to all of them. We really like to make it a very interactive experience. I highly recommend it.
And I will say, so many people email me thoughts about our podcasts or message me on LinkedIn, like, all the time. And I get a little frustrated in a good way, because I'm very flattered by the reach outs, but I'm also like, you would love the live stream. Like, ask this on the live stream and you can debate it live, and don't send me a quick LinkedIn message. Like, just, like, do it on the, so I just really, if you've ever listened to this and been like, that guy is so wrong, because that's most of the messages I get. It's like, I can't believe you said that. You're great. Like, well, now's the time to tell us. Live stream is a great way to argue with us too. So don't stay angry at us forever. Drop by the live stream and be angry at us there, I guess.
Yes, and I will remind everyone, if you're a fan of the podcast, if you're a fan of the live stream, please tell your friends about it. That's how this continues to grow. Leave those 5-star ratings and reviews. It really helps us. It helps others to find the podcast. And on that note, we will see you guys next week.